Welcome, everyone. This is the first of three Inside the Box lecture series lectures. And this semester, we're talking about experiencing the arts inside the box. Whether it's a true interior or maybe it could be an enclosed park. Our speakers will share their exceptional designs that house people, museum goers, dancers, musicians, and objects, exhibitions, and the visual arts. At the same time, these spaces protect our heritage and educate us all in unexpected ways. Tonight, I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Wendy Evans-Joseph, FAIA, who I've been fortunate to know for over 20 years. Her innovative buildings and moving exhibitions are perfect examples in which to explore our topic, arts from the inside. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Wendy. Wendy Evans-Joseph is the founder of Studio Joseph, an architectural and exhibition design practice. I'm going to pause for a minute. We've got some sound coming from outside. Okay, so Wendy Evans-Joseph is the founder of Studio Joseph, an architectural and exhibition design practice in New York City. The firm focuses on public, institutional, and cultural projects. She was a recipient of a Rome Prize, is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and an academician of the National Academy of Design. A former president of the Architectural League of New York, chair of the AIA National Committee of Design. She has held numerous leadership positions in the cultural arena. Wendy worked for over a decade in the office of Pei Cobb Fried and Partners before initiating her own practice, Studio Joseph, which has won countless awards for excellence. And then I just want to note that I have left Wendy's marvelous pop-up book, which I have here, in our display shelves, titled Architecture, Craft, and Mischief. I'm certain we will see more of that tonight. Welcome, Wendy.
Great. Thank you, Carol. That was really nice of you. And I want to say I'm thrilled to be here, and hello to all of you students. I don't see you. I understand that it's a little hard to do that sometimes with internet connection. You can see me, and I want to just say there's a bit of a lighting issue here, so don't judge. Stay looking at the images, not at my little picture, which is a bit overexposed. But that aside, but I really am happy, Carol, that you took this on as a discussion. I think that a lot of energy goes into talking about architecture, of course, from the outside, and a lot less from the inside. And I am a firm believer in the insides of buildings, in the way that we live, and in making places where people can come together. So my practice was very varied. In terms of, well, let me see. Okay, oops, sorry. I'm going to go back. Just getting used to the, all right. So we have very varied practice. I did residential work and institutional work, outdoor projects, indoor projects, everything. And about 5 years ago or so, I started to focus very specifically on working on community projects, mostly with museums and libraries, sometimes with other types of institutions that wanted to create a better relationship with their communities. And I believe that a lot of education is not in the classroom. It's the other places that you go to where you learn. You learn with your family, with your friends. It's what we call informal education. And by doing this, it's really a way to create a more equitable society. Schools differ everywhere you go, especially growing up. And so the early education varies from place to place, but that everyone is welcome into museums. Everyone is welcome into our public libraries. Everyone is welcome to kind of come together and to learn together. I want to really sort of think about the narrative here, and I want to think about how we can inspire and encourage communication. So tonight, I thought I would just talk about 4 exhibitions that we did in recent years and the ideas behind them. And I picked these 4 because they touched on 4 different areas that I think are important as we kind of move together in society. And I think also a lot of this has come up during the pandemic and during the sort of times in the having to do somewhat with the murder of George Floyd. But certainly all of these issues have always been there, and it isn't something that sort of should be like, oh, let's all wake up now, but rather these are issues that have been around for a very long time. And so I want to think about how they appear in the way that we think as designers. So I've worked with the National Building Museum. That's the first project I'll show you. And we'll talk about the environment, environmental issues, and the way that we think about ecology. And then we'll move on to other projects, each one of which I've selected to talk about different things. Again, project with the Cooper Hewitt, talking about accessibility, but in the fullest sense of the word. History, because our shared history is important to acknowledge and understand, and not to create a sort of a false history, to watch out for the deep fake. And then we'll talk about a sense of humanity, about respecting each other. And we'll talk about racism and its role in, especially in US history. I know not all of you are from the United States, but I think that you've been here long enough to sort of see what's going on and know a bit about this general history. So this isn't particularly specific, but something that I think you might find interesting. So when we work as designers, the way that we work is part of what we get to as a design. So this isn't something where, you know, everyone has the same process. The process is something you have to develop in order to get to the right solution. You have to engage with your clients, you have to talk with them, you have to listen with them, and you have to ask the right questions. So that's what we try to do. Now, some clients come with a particular problem, and then from that problem, we try to sort of ask questions and say, well, what is it we're trying to do here? Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. So the National Building Museum, I don't know if anyone's been there. It's in Washington. This is, in fact, the largest space in Washington. It's the place, one of these places where they have the inauguration, things like that. But it's gigantic. It's not particularly nice in a way, and it's very disorienting. And the National Building Museum is housed here, but good luck if you want to find it. You know, it's sort of hidden under these arcades. You don't know where the galleries are. You don't know what their ideas are. You don't even know, a lot of people come here and they're not really sure what is a building museum. So the space is on the left, and you can see it in all its glory. The museum occupies mostly the second floor and a bit of the first floor. And on the right, you see a plan, and those spaces in blue are different, we'll call them galleries, that we identified as a place where we could perhaps talk about the museum itself, sell tickets, give information, and also create a place where we could have a greater discourse about what is building, what is man-made, what are man-made environments, and what is the discussion around. So we identified 3 different themes for these 3 different galleries. The first being, of course, the place you come in, you get your ticket, and we're talking about the museum's collections, why they collect, what they collect, and how that reflects on who we are as a society. The second gallery is one where we talk about infrastructure. And the third, we talk about a kind of the texture of buildings, the texture of our environments, how we make decisions about materiality, and what that means, how that influences us, and how those affect our thoughts about the environment. So in the first gallery, you can see here a display wall. And we have a lot of fun with these. This idea that they said, well, what would you like to show, Wendy? And I said, I don't know, let's go walk around. So we walk around through the storage rooms, and I'm like, I like that, I like that, I like that. And what do these things tell us? A lot of things in the built environment, there are scale models, there are pieces here of actual buildings. but there are also toys and games and things that from a very early age, we think about putting one block on top of the other. So this idea of making and thinking about sort of making a fort in the backyard, making things with,
Wilma,
house. What? Sorry.
I'll have to have,
Oh, I heard someone speaking. But yeah, I mean, these are all part of our lives from early onset. So that's what I wanted to drive home here. When you first walk into the museum, is sort of like, this isn't something you look at. This is something you've already participated in. And you're already thinking about your own environment and the magical environments, the magic treehouse, all of these other things that you can have as well. Now, from that room, you move into a room where we're exploring infrastructure. And that is at different scales. So here we are on this planet, there are lots of us. We need shelter. We need to get from place to place. And the more and more of us that there are, the further we have to go, and the more need we have for greater and greater shelter. So whether that's creating huge urban environments or constructed landscapes or creating places for assembly where we might talk about social causes. You can see a little of that on the right, which is kind of a picture of the nation's capital and the mall where people protest. So these are all spaces with different uses that sort of are organized around talking to our civilization and the fact that as human beings, we very much have populated this earth and we've made changes to it because of our needs. And in fact, those changes, which have attributed to global warming, to issues of rising seas, obviously pollution and such, have all come back and now influence us and the way that we live. So there's this sort of dynamic that's gone on. So what you see in the middle of this room is a model of city skylines. And then what they're used as a kind of a barometer of tracking different issues that have come up in this built environment, whether it's resiliency or the need for housing or the use of materials. And those are tracked on this little table, which sort of takes you through all of the issues. And we kind of light these up from below. So it's kind of, again, in making exhibitions, we have a lot of facts we want to convey, but if you're not really supposed to put the book on the wall, at least in my game. We don't want to just sort of write about things and then you read them and walk around because no one's ever going to remember that. What we want to do is make it interesting, make it engaging, make it interactive. So that is, so that is sort of what this table will do. And what we do in our work is we work also with experts in slightly adjacent fields. So with media and technology. In-house in our architecture firm, of course, we're interior designers too, and we're graphic designers. We are content strategists. We work in fabrication and have experts in fabrication, but we also like the dynamic quality of media and we'll work with other consultants to do that. So again, having relationships with others, respectful relationships where we share kind of a mutual goal, goals. This is important to practice. And these are things you want to forge as you forge your career, that it isn't all coming from one place, that you want to have this kind of exchange and dialogue with people you respect. The clients, of course, as well as your collaborators. In the third gallery, we're talking about what is the materiality of the built environment? What are things made out of? And how did architects and designers make decisions about that materiality? What I think is that you consider in a satisfactory relationship, you consider the site, you consider climate, you consider local materials, because what we want to do is build with what's there. We don't want to be transporting materials all over the planet and using resources in order to make those changes. And so in this, we have embedded into this kind of ribbon that you see here, stories. You can listen to architects and designers making those changes and what they are. And just again, like, how do we make these environments? Sometimes it's graphics. This particular room, I wanted the scale of the pieces to be actually one-to-one scale of building facades. Even though it's a small room, I wanted the brick to be a brick size, grill work, all of the different things. And there are about 30 of these in the room. You're just looking at one of the faces. And we used a texture that's kind of a pixelated texture over everything. Because the reality of sort of just putting a brick on the wall is just too difficult. So we embedded those real objects into the band, and then we sprayed everything else. It's all, in case you're wondering how we did it, it's all CNC routed panels based on digital files that we created, and it's all sprayed with a product that's called Zolatone, which was in fact very popular back in the 50s and 60s. Is extremely resilient, and it's kind of a speckled thing because I didn't want it to feel just sort of like all painted white and very abstract. I wanted it to have some visceral quality. And what we've added since this picture was taken is a table in the middle of the room, which has samples of different materials that we hand-picked, some of them made from building materials made out of mushrooms, building materials made out of all kinds of organic matter. And we have those on display where you can touch them. So again, I'm bringing this project to light because it has a strong message. It tells you about the world, about our environment. It gives you things to hold on to feel. And it tells the story of this institution, of course, which is the primary institution in America. We're talking about the built environment, emphasizing ecology. So again, the design alters the content. The way that we see things alters the way that we perceive them. And so that's something that I wanted to drill into a little more closely with the second project. Okay, what is the second project? What are these things? They're all industrial design and different types of sculptural objects made by artists and industrial designers that talk about how we interact with the world and help people who might not necessarily be able to use all of their senses. It also helps people who have cognitive problems, that have other types of physical issues, that they're not able to sort of work always with things. These artists work with that. This little girl, for example, is working with a special wallpaper that has a scent to it. And there are reasons for that. Or there's special kind of bike locks that are easier for people who have a harder time with agility with their hands to assemble these locks. And they also, when you try to open them, it's a skunk lock. It, as you can imagine, lets off a scent as well. So it's another way of discouraging theft. So these are types of different products. And we were asked by the curators at the Cooper Hewitt Museum to work with about, I think it was almost 100 different pieces in different ways in order to bring forward these ideas. And the curators are very smartly thinking about the fact that the museum is in pretty much many cases, it's very ocular focused. It's all about what you see. And so the idea here is to bring forward, well, is it also about what we hear, what we touch, how we perceive things? Is there motion involved? And so that's what we're trying to get at. We knew from the beginning that this was not going to be easy because all of these designed objects are very, very different and they could compete in the space. So we started to think about how we might create environments within this larger gallery in order to have each of these places have their own context and be able to sing for themselves. So this is a kind of playful axonometric looking down to show these different walls, this wall system that we invented, which I'll tell you about in a minute, that gives you different areas that tell different parts of the curatorial narrative. And that screen system itself is part of that narrative. I will say that many of you know that things that when you make curves, they have a certain structural integrity to them. You might know about Jefferson's brick wall in the gardens at the University of Virginia, same kind of thing, because this room is historic and we were not allowed to tack into either the ceiling or the floor. So by doing things that had structural integrity, we wouldn't have to do that. So again, you want to problem solve on multiple levels. You want to problem solve in terms of your narrative, and you want to problem solve in terms of the sort of realistic attributes of the place that are given. The curators felt that some of these things that you interact with had a kind of a cool feeling to them. This cool, loungy, kind of, they had these metaphors that they were talking about, and we interpreted those in terms of color as well. So you can see in this slide, this sort of greens and blues and purples of the cool, loungy side. And then you're looking into warm, vibrant colors. So again, in your interior design, you're thinking color has meaning. It has a certain vibe to it. And how can you use that in terms of what you're trying to achieve here? And that's what we did. So you can see these sort of pinks and yellows on one side, looking through the cooler on the other. You can also see with this screen system, two different ways that we use this vinyl thread. The vinyl thread comes from a vinyl carpet manufacturer. It's called Bolon. We love their carpet, but one day when we were there, we saw on the wall kind of tassels of these fibers that they use to make the carpet. A lot of you might be familiar with how you make wool carpets with these little tufts. And this vinyl thread was very beautiful. It was sort of spun in different colors. So casually, I said to them, like, how about if we just bought the thread? And they're, sure, it comes in spools, you know, and so, okay. So it turned out that they were willing to share their raw material, and that's what we did. And on the screens, we experimented with two different methods, the hung method, which is denser, you see on the right here in the greens and blue, and on the left, a kind of a woven way of using them, which is more transparent. And we mix those throughout the exhibit. Again, full-size prototyping is very important. And then we work with a wonderful graphic designer, David Genko, and he helped us to include the graphic design in with this armature and to kind of come forward with things that sort of all work together into one cohesive system. So you can see here how that kind of comes together with the graphics. And again, you see the layering of color as you move through the space. One of the artists worked with design furniture that looked very much like candy. And isn't that fun to do in a kind of a candy environment with our rich color palette? So again, these are things that you could smell, that you could touch. You could hear their stories in different ways. So these glass forms, you kind of bend down and you can sniff. These are 3D printed objects that are printed in sugar or in other food materials. And they're used sometimes as vessels for people who, either for people who have low eyesight and stuff, that they can smell what they're using and they know these different vessels. So it's tactile, but also inclusive. This man, he's a good person, not to worry about what he's doing. As he's moving the fur on this wall, there's music being composed. So as he touches different parts of the fur, different types of music will come up. And so you can do musical composition through this tactile wall. This woman on the left, she's smelling these wool balls that have different scents. And again, it's bringing up what's happening naturally in our environment. Everything that we did here, we also used Braille. And the Braille is strategically imposed over the text. So if you're with someone who is using the Braille and you're reading, you're doing it together. What I really felt strongly about is not separating people in terms of their abilities. So you bring everyone together, everyone's learning together. And in doing that, you're watching them and sort of, understanding how they're perceiving the world. At the same time, they're understanding how you're perceiving the world. So again, what we want to do is not segregate. We want to integrate this feeling together. And so that was the sort of main occupation here. And again, all of the senses. And our graphic designer had a field day. Carol, you knew this book, had a field day thinking about everything, sort of all the different types and textures that we need to avail ourselves of, and all the different sounds as you go through it. And he just organized, I think, hundreds of these words alphabetically as you sort of think about the environment. So I challenge all of you to make your own list about the things you want to think about as you design. And they shouldn't all just be visual. They want to take into consideration every possibility and every tactile sensation. Okay, so now I'd like to talk a little bit about experiences that go beyond the static, that go beyond everything that you can see, to try to think about things like what sometimes you want to evoke that is more emotional and tells a story that isn't necessarily something we understand, that there's a sort of mystical quality or magical quality or even a religious quality, all of these other things. So you might be asked to design spaces that have those qualities to them. Now, in this case, it's a museum, but a small museum that is dedicated to the ancient cult of Mithras. Mithras existed around the same time as the turn of Christianity evolving, and around 0. It was slightly before and after. These were times of the Roman powers. And in fact, the Roman Empire, as you might remember, went all the way into Great Britain. And London, the word London, comes from the early Latin word of ancient Londinium. And so London was a Roman part of the Roman Empire. And because of that, there are Roman ruins and Roman stories to be told there. So Mithras was, again, this the Mithraic religion was very difficult to understand from our remnants, but the archaeologists and others are trying to put it together. This picture in the upper left is a picture of the ruins of a Mithraic temple that was found when they excavated after the in the rubble after the Blitz. So during World War II, London was bombed. Many buildings came down. Later, when they were rebuilding, they excavated, and lo and behold, they found this temple ruin. And you can tell they're British because they love to queue. They're all queuing all around here to see this ancient ruin. And there were the head of Mithras, as part of the statue, is a very specific figure, was found in this rubble. And it was a huge sensation. And it was visited by really, like, I think it was something like 100,000 people came to see this ruin. When a building was built, and then later the site is used by Bloomberg, the company, to build a New World headquarters in London with Norman Foster. It's an enormous new building. And at this time, the City of London asked Bloomberg to put these ruins back into the building at the level where they were found, and to create an exhibition around it. And Bloomberg Philanthropies took this on and embraced the idea. And we were hired to work with a media firm named Local Projects to do all the interpretation and create a museum. It's a 3-level museum, which you can see in this diagram here, an entry-level gallery, a mezzanine level, and then a lower level where we have the Mithraic temple on display. So, okay, how do you do that? I just talked and talked about setting this up, but the truth is nobody has any idea what's going on. And so what I was thinking is, what does it mean when you go to a museum and you see these artifacts? Like, what does that mean to you? And so I thought what we should do first, before we get into the cult, before we start to dig into something that is incomprehensible, let's talk about what we know. And we know people. And so these were artifacts that were found on the site. And a lot of them, the driving force was to show things that are very personal. In fact, in that case, you have, like, ancient Romans, they were people, they had nails, they have little manicure sets. They have this leather sandals. There are rings and a few pieces of jewelry. It's not particularly fancy. They had writing tablets where they would send messages back and forth to each other, little wood writing tablets. And so what I wanted was for you to find a kind of a personal relationship with the people of that time, with what they were doing, with how they lived, with the same kind of vessels that we use today, whether they be glass or ceramic, a lot of the same building materials, nails, and such, so we would understand sort of a little more and care more about this time period. And so this case is designed, I used the vocabulary that you might, for those of you who've seen buildings in Italy, this rustication that you see sometimes at the base of buildings with these kind of pyramidal structures. I thought, oh, this will work for the case because you won't have shadows cast and you'll create this kind of topography, again, for visual imagery and texture to draw you in. And this room is also used for modern contemporary design shows, which is kind of fantastic. So you always have this idea of these artists are invited to do different interpretations, always inspired by the archaeology, inspired by the cultural niches. And there have been numerous ones of these. They change about 2 to 3 times a year. Curators extremely smart, and it uses artists from all over the world. So keep in mind that the relationship that we might have as designers with the art community is one that it can be very fruitful in terms of collaborations, juxtapositions, working with people who see the world in a slightly different way. From this floor, you start to move down. We use a kind of stratigraphy in the wall to sort of bring you downstairs. And you arrive at a mezzanine level where we do tell some of the story of Mithras, the ancient cult, using film. It's very evocative. It's not kind of like realistic imagery, but sort of fades in and out. There's an audio track that goes with it. And aside that, we made resin casks of a few of the elements so we could unpack the story in greater detail. And these are done on screens where you can kind of dive in. That resin sculpture in the foreground is an exact one-to-one. We scanned one-to-one the head of Mithras that was found on the site. And you can see, it's him because he has this particular hat on. It's got a little beanie in the front of it. So that is Mithras, and then we look at the temple, and we look at the iconography for Mithras himself, who is a character who slays a bull and goes to the center of the earth, etc. So we tell this story, and then from there you move down again and into the room where you have the remnants of the temple. And we have created the temple itself in light. And we do that by filling the room with haze, which is a theatrical kind of mist. And then I just will not go into it in detail because this isn't the thrust of tonight, but to say that it is extremely technically challenging to create these sheets of light. We do this by focusing light above the ceiling through a series of funnels and mirrors to create planes. And then these planes project down through. Again, I want to emphasize the fact that full-scale prototyping and testing is very important when you're trying to invent something new. Needless to say, every client doesn't just say, oh, planes of light, that sounds great, let's just do it. You have to prove it. You have to show it to them. You have to test it. You have to look at the scale. I brought in Matthew Schreiber, who's in the second image, who had worked with Tyrrell for many, many years and was an expert in lighting effects. He was an incredible collaborator on this. Again, working relationships with people who have expertise beyond our own. This is not to say that we didn't work also with a traditional lighting designer, but we needed Matthew to help guide us through this process. And then we, of course, came in with technical expertise. For those of you who think about design, what happens above a ceiling is very complicated. And again, weaving a lighting system into that was also that. So this is kind of the effect of it. you come in. We did create this kind of bridge effect so you can occupy the center of it. The altar we did in steel. I had that made here in New York. In fact, the resin sculptures were also made in New York. There was, believe it or not, no one in London who could achieve this technical capacity to make these things. But it's very dynamic, and there is a kind of a whole presentation. It takes about 10 minutes, and you can walk through it. We also simulate some of the experience of the cult ceremony, which we don't know a lot about, but it had to do with water in parts, as well as light and such. So this is the way it works. And again, it's dynamic as you move through it. These shadows on the side are kind of an inverse of the columns of the space. And so you see that we use those capitals to sort of create those shadow effects. So they're kind of negative columns instead of positive columns. So that is this show that I wanted to bring forward to you. And again, what it does is it allows people to come together. They talk. We encourage that. We encourage them to sort of explore together and to think about things in different ways. I think that one other part of it that I'll say before this ends one more time is my goal is to make learning fun and to make learning something that everyone wants to participate in. This is not necessarily a place which is about homework assignments and things like that. It's a place where no matter who you are, that you have a way to enter. I'm going to show one last project. I think I'm doing all right on time, right, Carol? Almost done here. This last project is a project that we did for the National Museum of the American Indian, where I learned from one of the curators this wonderful statement about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget that makes us who we are. So history is of course everything, but what we do is we have to select and understand our history and own up to it when we need to. You know, people, you see a lot about Native peoples, or we perfectly correct to also say American Indians. We know a lot about them. We know about them through sports teams and names of, I think, 30 of our states are Indian names. What they found at the museum was that people would come, they would walk around the museum, they'd look at baskets and blankets and buy a dream catcher and go home and essentially leave Indians at the door. They didn't feel that it was part of their lives or even part of you know, their cultural heritage. So we wanted to turn that around, not by erasing all of the sort of implications and things that are part of it, but by celebrating them and making sure that people understood what they were about. So we created an exhibition that starts with the truth that Native peoples and Indian culture are embedded in everything in America, whether it's a Tomahawk missile, an Indian motorcycle, on and on and on, you know. And so all of these things are to be understood as part of our greater landscape. And the curators, and what we try to do here is invite everyone into our living room. And so we fought very hard. I know that many of you go to museums all the time. You don't find this kind of comfy furniture. We fought for these sofas. We fought for a place where people could sit down and rest and talk and think about what it is they're looking about. And everyone gets interested. In the back, that pixelated image is actually a movie that plays, which shows clips from all kinds of spaghetti westerns to, you know, all kinds of different images as well. The plan is slightly incomprehensible. The building itself is a tour de force. What I tried to do is create a certain rigor. Again, as interior designers, sometimes we're just left with spaces we have no idea how to control. And so I wanted to have this main space in the middle, which is that long, narrow space that I was just showing pictures of. off of which you have different galleries that tell different stories. One of which is Thanksgiving, which I might show you a little bit more about if we have time. The other ones talk about different the well-known episodes in American history and characters as well. So again, it's this relationship that you have between the artifacts and who you are. We created this armature, which has embedded in it both objects and 2D graphics, and again, dynamic things. So we're trying to sort of take clues from the material, but not let it sort of be so much part of a kind of a realistic depiction. So this is our armature. Again, it's all, for those of you who are interested, it's all a 1x1 welded steel framework that was in fact installed. This entire room was installed in less than a week. It came in full scale 5-foot sections, which were all very easily toothed together with this sort of positive negative connections. And it was all shop painted, so that this was actually wound up being, again, it's a museum, it's not a Tiffany's, so it's all very economically put together. And the voice is very important here. The voice is to involve everyone in a story, not to tell them. This is what learning is about. Involve yourself in the story. Understand that the world is, as they point out here, is a complicated place. And so that's what we tried to do. And again, we did it through actual artifacts, graphics, and kind of all the different media that we could bring into the game. So these are some of the artifacts. They're extremely beautiful pieces. They have to be changed quite frequently. But what we did here, just in terms of the tricks of the trade, is we didn't have a large budget. So the tops of these cases, we just frosted, used a sanded glass finish, so they pick up on the light. So you get the feeling of a luminous surface, even if you don't have necessarily lighting in every case. So again, it sort of brings, it elevates these regalia, as they're referred to. We keep the signage very stealth, very much we're just flagging it on the side, not making a big deal. So if you want to read, it's there for you or not. And so again, this is the kind of project where we're talking to the curators, we're listening, we're asking questions, we're trying to get at the essence of what is it that they're trying to say, and finding a way to say that makes sense, that's intriguing, and hopefully, you know, why not have a little fun as well? So in the end, what do we learn? We involve the visitor in, they're able to sort of give us some feedback too. They're questioning their own past. They're telling us their stories. All of the it's been, sometimes people, we put out little postcards. Sometimes people will write 3 and 4 of them and clip them together. People want to share. We want to have a conversation. We want to listen. So that's what we do. So I think that I have this. I think I might not play it now because I think we're kind of at time. And then we can see if people are interested. Maybe I'll play it at the end.
Oh, Wendy, play it.
I'll play it. Okay. So look, this is the United States of America. It's coming up soon. It's Thanksgiving. There are issues. Let's hear what they have to say.
Did that meal actually happen?
It happened, but nobody really cared. It wasn't like, oh, remember that time last November, let's have the smokes over again, fire up the grill. Nobody thought that because it was just a thing that happened. But the Pilgrim folks there, they were writing letters or writing journals. They were like really meticulously detailing what was happening. But even that written account gets lost for basically 200 years and doesn't even emerge until the 1840s when this document is discovered again. And even then, it's not a big deal. It's actually in a footnote. And we remember that, we rescue it from being a footnote because that has meaning now. And so by the early 20th century, Indians are an indivisible part of what creates the United States. It's not a chapter that happened and it was bad and we got over it. Where in your head, or in your pantry, or in your garage. This imagery, representations, advertising. Thanksgiving says, however imperfectly we remember Indians, we're remembering Indians. And with all the problems with it, it's still a powerful idea, and it's still powerful to not Photoshop Indians out of the national narrative, to say, we're owning this. If there's a way that can open up ways to start thinking about it differently, opens up for people to become activists and try to change things, invent some new kind of Thanksgiving. Let's have the discussion. Let's see where that goes. But before you get to the lessons and is it right to use that? Is it whatever? I don't know. I guess if I were to put myself in terms of, this a cartoon Indian and all this at Thanksgiving, I'd probably be saying I'm glad to be here. Better than the alternative.